This is part 1 of the typographic portrait tutorial, and in part 1 we'll be getting our image ready for creating a typographic portrait. Step 1 is to take a portrait or find one that you've already taken. It's kind of hard to say what looks best, so you'll want to shoot multiple images so that you have some backups, and the image will end up being reduced to black, gray, and white only and extremely high contrast, so the image will have to be able to hold up to that, as will all of its details. Now, when I was selecting an image to use, some of the ones that I liked that looked great as a color portrait, once I converted them, I didn't like how they looked or couldn't envision them as the typographic portrait. This was another one that I looked at, and once I converted it, I just wasn't sure how this was going to work out okay with this white background blending right into the white face, so I decided to get rid of this one, and the one I decided on is this picture. Your first step is to convert it to black and white. There are lots of ways to do this. What I did was I did a black and white layer, left it exactly as it appeared, and then the next step is to really increase that contrast. We could do brightness contrast, but I prefer curves so I have a little more control. Normally I would just make an S-shaped curve by pulling here and here, but in this case I wanted it a little more intense, so I actually moved this over on the black end and the white end, making a steeper curve there. Making it something like that. So now that we have this high contrast portrait, we want to merge all of the layers. You can do this several different ways. Maybe the best way so that you can retain your background image would be Control, Shift, Alt, and E. And that makes a layer that has everything below it included on that layer. So now we can turn these 3 off. We don't need them. And just for clarification, because we're going to have a lot of layers on this assignment, let's rename this Posterized Layer. Because the next step is we're going to posterize it. Go to Image, Adjustments, go down to Posterize. Posterize is going to reduce it to even fewer colors or levels. And for this tutorial we're going to use 3 levels: black, white, and gray. And say OK. I think this is going to work great, but the background is slightly distracting to me with these leaves that turned to this spotty gray in the background. I'd prefer if it was just black. So what I did was I took the burn tool and worked with midtones, shadows, and highlights to burn these areas until they go away. So there might be some areas in your image that you don't want to include. Now is the time to get rid of them, not later. Now highlights. And the other thing that you could try is the clone stamp or the spot healing brush. Okay, that background is much less distracting. So this is the end of step 1, where we're getting our image ready and posterizing it. So at this point you would want to save this as a Photoshop file, and you can call it Typographic Portrait, so that it's ready for the next step, part 2, which is where we're going to create our text, brushes, and patterns.